I bought an old house on the edge of a small, silent town, a fresh start, or so I thought. The neighbors told me one thing: never move the mirrors, never stare too long. The first night, one of them shifted by itself. Since then, I'm no longer sure the reflection in the glass is mine. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome, Under the Bed. It happened in the late autumn of 2019, in a small, forgotten town in northern Pennsylvania. The kind of place where fog settles over the road before dawn, and every house looks a little too quiet. That's where John Miller, a 35-year-old electrician, decided to start over after his divorce. He had found a small 2-story house on the edge of town, cheap, old, but solid. The ad said minor repairs needed. He didn't care. He just wanted silence. The real estate agent handed him the keys with an odd half-smile. "Just, don't move the mirrors," she said, like she was half-joking. John laughed, thinking it was a local superstition. The house had 5 rooms, all empty except for the furniture covered in dusty sheets, and mirrors. A lot of mirrors. Tall, narrow ones, small round ones, all with dark wooden frames. Every single one stood opposite a door, as if someone had placed them there for a reason. The first night was quiet, except for the wind crawling through the cracks of the window frames. He unpacked his tools, made a cup of instant coffee, and went to bed on an air mattress. When he closed his eyes, he swore he heard a faint scraping sound downstairs, like wood sliding on wood. He told himself it was the old foundation settling. The next morning, the neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper, stood by the fence when he went out to check the mailbox. "You moved into the old Cooper house," she said softly. "Don't take down the mirrors. They keep things where they belong." John smiled awkwardly. "Superstition, right?" She didn't smile back. "They said that too." Before it started. That evening, while checking the wiring, John noticed the mirror in the hallway had a crack running across the corner. He decided to remove it and replace it with a small TV mount. The mirror was heavier than it looked, its back covered with strange burn marks. When he set it aside, the air in the room felt colder. A faint smell of iron drifted in the air, sharp and metallic. He ignored it. At midnight, he woke to a sound, a short, brittle clink, like glass tapping glass. Then another. He grabbed his flashlight and walked through the house. Everything was still. The hallway light flickered once. He turned toward the corner where he had left the mirror, and froze. It was standing again. Upright. In its original place. He stared at it for a full minute. The reflection looked perfectly normal, except for one thing: the angle was slightly off, showing a slice of the room that didn't exist behind him. He lifted the mirror carefully, trying to find how it could have fallen, and stood up again. The floor was level, no loose boards, no wires. Just cold air pressing against his skin. He put it down again, this time face up against the wall, and went back to bed. The following morning, sunlight pushed through the curtains. He walked into the hallway, and the mirror was back where it had been the day before, spotless, no crack, no dust. John stood motionless. He could feel his pulse in his throat. The first thought that came to mind wasn't ghosts or curses. It was someone had been in the house. He checked every lock, every window, even the basement door. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of entry. He spent the afternoon working outside, trying to shake it off. When the sun went down, he looked at the house from the yard. The windows reflected the orange sky, but one of them, on the second floor, looked darker, as if something inside was standing too close to the glass. He went back in. The silence was heavy. The smell of metal returned, faint but present. When he passed the hallway, the mirror's reflection caught his shoulder, and for a split second, he thought he saw a movement behind him, slow and deliberate. But when he turned, nothing was there. He left every light on that night and didn't sleep. Around 3:12 a.m., the power flickered. The bulbs dimmed, and from somewhere downstairs came a quiet tap, 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 like someone gently touching the mirror with their fingernail. By morning, John convinced himself he was exhausted, that his mind was playing tricks after too many sleepless nights. He poured himself coffee, glanced toward the hallway, and stopped breathing. The mirror stood exactly where it had before. But this time, there was a faint smear across the glass, like the outline of a hand pressed from the inside. The following week passed quietly, or at least that's what John tried to tell himself. The mirror in the hallway still stood where it always had, unbroken, perfectly clean, and reflecting more light than it should. He avoided looking directly into it. Every time he passed, he caught glimpses of something, small inconsistencies, like shadows that didn't belong or the faint outline of movement where there was none. He kept busy with repairs, rewiring the kitchen lights, replacing old outlets, fixing a leaking pipe. But the house had a way of making every sound louder. The creaks in the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, even the ticking of his wristwatch felt unnaturally sharp. On the fifth night, while checking a fuse box in the hallway, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. In the mirror's reflection, the toolbox behind him was closed. But when he turned around, it was open. He froze, staring back and forth. It was impossible. He rubbed his eyes and leaned closer, and that's when he noticed his reflection blinking a fraction of a second too late. He stepped back. The air felt heavy, as if the whole house was holding its breath. He shut the lights and went upstairs, trying to convince himself it was just fatigue. But when he passed another mirror on the landing, he saw movement again, a dark figure at the bottom of the stairs. He spun around. The staircase was empty. That night, he barely slept. He kept hearing small knocks from the hallway, irregular and soft. The kind that could almost be explained by wood expanding, almost. Around 3 a.m., he heard a noise like fingernails brushing against glass. He turned on the light, but the sound stopped instantly. The next morning, he decided to set up a camera. He placed it on a shelf facing the hallway mirror and let it run through the night. When he reviewed the footage the following day, his stomach turned cold. The timestamp showed 3:07 a.m. The mirror's surface began to shimmer faintly, as if something moved just behind the glass. A dim outline of a person formed for a few seconds before the camera shut off on its own. The last recorded frame was pure static, with a distorted whisper barely audible through the speakers. It repeated one phrase, "Don't move the mirrors." He replayed it again and again, each time hoping it would sound different, but the voice remained the same. Calm. Female. Close. John unplugged the camera, locked it in the toolbox, and left the house for several hours just to breathe. When he returned that evening, the house felt colder than usual. He checked the thermostat, it read 58 degrees, though the heater was running. He rubbed his arms and walked to the living room. That's when he noticed another change. The small round mirror above the fireplace, which had always faced the center of the room, was now tilted slightly toward the hallway. He didn't remember touching it. When he tried to adjust it back, the frame felt warm, almost as if someone's hands had been holding it moments before. He backed away and sat on the couch, staring at the reflection. In it, the living room appeared normal, empty. Then, in one smooth motion, the reflection of the door began to open. The sound of the hinges followed a moment later, from behind him. John turned, expecting to see the door swinging slowly inward, but it was perfectly still. When he looked back at the mirror, it was once again normal. No movement, no sound. Just his pale face staring back. For the first time since moving in, he felt real fear, not the kind that passes quickly, but the kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. He called his sister, telling her briefly about strange noises and the camera glitch. She laughed it off and told him to rest, maybe see a doctor if he kept losing sleep. That night, he tried to stay awake on the couch with all the lights on. Around 2:30, the bulbs flickered twice and then steadied. In the reflection across the room, the hallway behind him appeared darker than before, almost as if the light couldn't reach that far. Slowly, a faint shape began to form, tall, motionless, standing near the wall where the first mirror was. He sat up straight, heart pounding. The shape didn't move. He blinked several times, and when his eyes refocused, it was gone. But the air carried that metallic scent again, sharp like blood and rust. He forced himself to stay awake until dawn. When morning finally came, he went to check the hallway. The mirror looked the same. But there, at the bottom of the frame, were small wet prints, bare footprints, smaller than his, leading toward the basement door. He followed them only halfway before stopping. The basement door was slightly ajar, though he remembered locking it weeks ago. He closed it gently and stood there, listening. For a long moment, the house was silent. Then, from behind the door, came a faint, muffled whisper. It was the same voice from the recording, but this time it sounded closer. "Don't look." By the third week, John's exhaustion had reached its limit. He could barely tell dreams from waking hours anymore. Every night the same pattern repeated, soft knocks, flickering lights, the low hum of something moving just behind the walls. Yet what truly disturbed him was not what he saw, but what he didn't. Whatever lived in that house seemed to understand timing, appearing only when he was alone, tired, or unsure if what he'd seen was real. One morning, after another sleepless night, John sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old property records. He had found the house's address listed under the name Mary Cooper. The sale history stopped abruptly in 2008, marked previous owner unaccounted for. He called the local county office, pretending to be a distant relative. The woman on the line hesitated before saying, "We don't usually share details, but that case was strange." She disappeared. The police found no signs of a break-in. Just her car in the driveway and all the mirrors covered with sheets. That detail sent a chill down his spine. He thanked her and hung up. The house around him felt heavier after the call, like the air itself was listening. That evening, he decided to search the basement, the one place he hadn't explored since moving in. The steps were narrow and uneven. The air was damp, thick with the smell of mold and rust. He flicked the light switch, nothing. Only the dim beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness. In one corner stood several cardboard boxes stacked together, covered in dust. Inside were yellowed photographs, a cracked porcelain doll, and a few old VHS tapes labeled only with dates. John took them upstairs and set up an old player he'd found in the closet. The first tape showed a woman in her late 30s sitting at a kitchen table. Her voice was calm, almost soothing. "Day 17, she said. The mirrors keep moving. I hear him in the glass at night." The next few minutes were silent except for the faint hum of static. Then the woman turned her head slightly, as if someone had whispered her name. Her eyes widened, and she whispered, "He's behind me again." The screen went black. John rewound, convinced it was a trick of light. But the reflection in the kitchen window behind her, the shape standing in the background, was too distinct. A man's silhouette. Tall. Motionless. The second tape was dated 3 days later. The woman's hair was unkempt, her hands trembling. "I tried covering them," she said. "It's worse now. It doesn't want to be shut out." Then, in a voice barely audible, she said, "It's showing me people who aren't there." John stopped the tape halfway through. He felt the walls closing in around him. The house was silent, yet every instinct told him he wasn't alone. That night, he sat in front of the hallway mirror, unable to resist the need to understand. He turned on the camera again and pointed it at the glass. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. Then, just before 3 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped sharply. His breath fogged the air. The reflection in the mirror began to blur, the background melting into darkness. He leaned forward, whispering, "What do you want?" A faint voice answered, not from behind him, not from the air, but from inside the glass. "To be seen." He stumbled back, knocking over the camera. The screen flickered, capturing only static and a shadow that stretched across the frame. When he dared to look again, the mirror showed him standing perfectly still, but his reflection's eyes were looking somewhere else. The next morning, John called the local police, hoping to find some official report about Mary Cooper's case. The officer on duty recognized the address immediately. "That house again?" he said under his breath. "We've been there a few times." Noise complaints, people moving in and out, always the same thing, say they see someone in the mirrors. The officer refused to say more but mentioned something John couldn't forget. When they searched for her, they found a message scratched into the basement wall, "Don't move them." She'd carved it herself. That evening, John went down to the basement once more. The same boxes, the same smell. He brushed aside some cobwebs and saw faint letters carved deep into the concrete near the corner, almost covered by dust. The same words. "Don't move them." He stood there for a long time, flashlight trembling in his hand. The whisper from the night before echoed faintly in his head. When he turned to leave, his light passed over something new, a small mirror leaning against the wall, its frame broken. It hadn't been there before. He pointed the beam at it, and for a split second, he saw movement in the reflection, a woman's face, pale, watching him from inside the glass. He stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, catching the mirror again. This time, it was empty. Just his own reflection staring back at him. But as he turned to leave, something else became clear, the mirror's angle. It was tilted just enough to show the staircase behind him. And on that staircase, in the reflection, someone was standing, still, silent, waiting. John stopped pretending he wasn't afraid. Sleep had become impossible, and even daylight didn't make him feel safe anymore. The house seemed alive, reacting to him, watching. Every creak, every flicker of light felt deliberate, as if something inside was aware of his every move. By now, he was living on black coffee and panic. He decided to document everything. He set up 3 cameras, one in the hallway facing the first mirror, one in the living room, and another in his bedroom. He wanted proof, something real that would explain what was happening. The first night, nothing unusual happened. But on the second, the footage showed something that made his stomach twist. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the hallway mirror fogged up from the inside. The glass seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. A handprint appeared on the surface, small, slender, and wet, as if pressed from within. A few seconds later, John appeared in the frame, sleepwalking, his eyes open but unfocused. He stopped in front of the mirror and whispered something the microphone barely caught. The voice was his, but distant, almost hollow. "Do you see me now?" Then the video cut to black. When he woke that morning, he remembered nothing. His neck hurt, and his feet were cold, covered in dust. The camera's battery was dead, though he'd charged it fully the day before. He replayed the footage 3 times, then turned off the computer and sat in silence for an hour, his hands shaking. That afternoon, he called a local priest, Father Reynolds, and asked if he could bless the house. The priest hesitated. "Which house?" When John gave the address, the man sighed. "I've been there before. I'll come by tomorrow." At sunset, John heard movement upstairs. Slow, dragging steps. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed to the landing. The steps stopped. Everything was silent. He aimed the light toward the long hallway mirror, and saw his reflection smiling back at him. His own face, but with a grin that wasn't his. The flashlight slipped from his hand. When it hit the floor, the reflection's mouth moved, forming silent words he couldn't hear. He turned and ran downstairs, breathing hard, refusing to look back. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Father Reynolds arrived. A tall, serious man with tired eyes. The moment he stepped inside, his expression changed. "There's something wrong here," he muttered. He sprinkled holy water in each room and prayed under his breath. When they reached the hallway, the priest stopped in front of the mirror. The surface trembled slightly, as if reacting to his presence. "You've moved them," he said quietly. John nodded, confused. "Just 1, weeks ago." "Why?" The priest's hand tightened around the cross in his pocket. "They were never meant to face the doors. It's an old containment ritual. Mirrors reflect, but they also hold. If one is moved, the boundary breaks." Before John could respond, the priest stepped back. The air turned bitterly cold, and a low hum filled the room, like the vibration of a deep voice just below hearing. The lights flickered violently. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. Father Reynolds shook his head. "I can't help you. Whatever is here, it's not bound to this place anymore." He left without another word. John stood alone in the quiet house, his heart pounding. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. That night, he locked every door and window. Around 2:40 a.m., the heater clicked off, and the air went dead still. Then came the sound of breathing, close, too close. He turned his head slowly toward the mirror. In the dim light, he saw himself again. But this time, the reflection was facing away, staring into the darkness behind it. He whispered, "What do you want?" The reflection turned its head, one movement too slow, one breath too late. The voice came not from the room but from inside the glass, whispering through the vibration of the air. "You opened it." John backed away. Every mirror in the house began to fog at once. Their surfaces darkened, shapes moving behind them, like figures pacing in another room. From the corner of his eye, he saw hands pressing against the glass, fingers sliding downward, leaving trails of condensation. He ran to the front door, but the handle wouldn't turn. His reflection in the hallway mirror stood completely still, even as he pounded on the wood. Then the reflection smiled again. It lifted its hand and placed it against the glass, palm open. A faint crack formed under its fingers, spidering outward. John's flashlight flickered. The reflection's hand began to push forward, distorting the surface like water. He stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table. The lights went out completely. For a few seconds, there was only breathing, his and something else's. When the power returned moments later, the mirror was shattered on the floor. But there was no sign of anything else in the room. No footprints, no figure. Just a trail of water droplets leading toward the stairs, as if someone had walked away. John stood frozen, trying to understand what he'd seen. Then, from upstairs, came a soft creak. The bedroom door opening by itself. He whispered to the empty house, "Please, stop." The voice that answered was not his. It came from the dark hallway, smooth and close to his ear. "It's already out." The police report said the call came from a neighbor just after sunrise. She'd seen the lights in John Miller's house burning all night and thought he'd fallen asleep with them on again. But that morning, something felt different. She swore the curtains moved though no one stood by the window. When officers arrived, the house was silent. The front door was unlocked, no signs of forced entry. The air inside was heavy and cold, the kind of cold that doesn't belong in a heated home. The first thing they noticed was the mirrors, every one of them perfectly clean, standing upright, facing the same directions as before. There were no footprints, no broken glass, no struggle. John was gone. Detective Harris, who'd been on the force for 20 years, led the investigation. "People don't just vanish," he said as they moved through the rooms. But the longer he stayed inside, the quieter his voice became. Something about the house made sound feel smaller, swallowed up before it could echo. In the living room, they found John's camera still recording, the red light blinking faintly. The last video file was dated the night before. The footage began normally, John sitting on the couch, exhausted, speaking directly to the lens. "If anyone finds this," he said, "don't stay here. Don't look in the mirrors. They're not reflections anymore." He paused, eyes darting toward the hallway. "It comes when the house goes quiet. When you stop moving. That's when it looks back." The video continued for another 5 minutes as John moved through the house, showing each mirror. His breathing grew heavier, his words shaking. "It's not stuck in the glass. It's using them. Watching from all of them." At 3:07 a.m., the hallway camera caught the last clear image of him. John stood in front of the tall mirror, his reflection slightly delayed. He raised his hand slowly, almost hypnotized, and touched the glass. The reflection didn't move at first. Then it smiled. The lights flickered, and both figures, John and his reflection, leaned forward at the same time. For half a second, their faces aligned perfectly. Then the screen went black. When the police found the camera, it was still running, recording nothing but static and a faint humming sound, like electricity underwater. Downstairs, in the basement, they found the old VHS tapes John had watched. But there was another one that hadn't been listed before, a tape labeled simply new. The officers played it back at the station. It showed the same hallway mirror, but instead of Mary Cooper, it was John sitting at the table, looking into the glass. His mouth was moving, but no sound came through. Behind him, in the reflection, another figure stood. The tape ended abruptly when John turned toward the camera, eyes wide as if noticing something that wasn't supposed to be there. The coroner's office declared him missing. No sign of blood, no fingerprints, no forced exit. But one thing stood out to the investigators. In every mirror in the house, faint smudges appeared, like the prints of hands pressed from the inside. 2 weeks later, the property went back on the market. The real estate company cleaned the place, replaced the broken lights, and left the mirrors as they were. Too expensive to remove them, one worker said. A young couple came to view the house. The woman liked it immediately, a bit old-fashioned, but charming, she said. The agent smiled and mentioned the story of the missing owner as a small-town rumor. You know how people talk, she laughed. The couple moved in the following month. On the first night, the husband unpacked boxes while his wife explored upstairs. She called down, "Did you know there's a note carved into the basement wall?" He laughed it off, too busy connecting the television. "What does it say?" he shouted back. "Don't move them," she replied. He froze for a moment but said nothing. Later, when he went to bed, he noticed one of the hallway mirrors seemed cleaner than before, polished, gleaming, as if someone had just wiped it from the other side. He shrugged it off and turned off the light. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the bulb in the hallway flickered once, then steadied. The mirror across from the door rippled faintly, like the surface of disturbed water. For a moment, the reflection inside was empty. Then, slowly, a man appeared standing there, wearing the same clothes John Miller had worn in the last video. He stood completely still, eyes hollow, a faint smile crossing his face. And when the husband turned on the light, the reflection moved half a second too late, not matching him, but watching him. The police never returned to the house again. The new owners never complained. The lights still glow every night until morning, and the neighbors say that if you look closely through the window, you can see someone standing in the hallway, motionless, facing the mirror. The house remains for sale now and then, always with the same listing photo, the living room bathed in sunlight, mirrors shining brightly. But if you look close enough at the image, zoom in just a little, there's a figure in the glass. And it's not the photographer.